Greetings, friends and brethren. This is Dr. Bob Thiel for the Continuing Church of God. Is it possible that the Great Tribulation could start next year, the year after? Is it possible the Great Tribulation could begin prior to the year 2020? Now, a lot of people have different views on this. You've got some people who believe the Great Tribulation has began, and others who believe it's over. And there's various ones who think the Great Tribulation will be this year or next year. And still you've got others who say this is centuries away. And then you've got other people who say you can't possibly know when it is based on some statements that Jesus made. So can you know for sure? And if so, what's the criteria? How can you know? Well, since probably 2008, I believe every single year I've denounced one or more people who said the Great Tribulation was going to begin that year or some year since that particular time. And so what I'd like to start off now is to go through a current prediction from somebody. I think this is a Protestant source. And then I think I want to go through another one that somebody who claims to be in the Church of God has. So you get an idea about the type of arguments or logic that people have brought to bear on whether or not the Great Tribulation can begin, or when they think it's going to begin. And then I want to go through scriptures because, in my view, Jesus made it pretty clear when it couldn't be and how to know about when it's going to be. And while people can argue about scriptures, I think some of them are actually pretty clear. So here's one, and I believe this is from a non-Church of God source, but what's interesting about it is it says, "Are 6,000 years of sin almost over? Will Jesus come in 2016? The Bible presents enlightening, logical, and compelling answers to these questions. In short, yes." Now, it's the second half of 2016 already. It hasn't happened, and it's not going to happen. But this individual mentions the 6,000 years for humanity to rule itself. The implication is, the person goes further, and this is actually a woman. Says God's applied the principle, the pattern of a week a week of 7 years. He told the children of Israel to plant and harvest their land for 6 years, and then to let the land rest the 7th year. He called the 7th year a Sabbath. It's called a sabbatical. And he says you got the weekly Sabbath. You got to work 6 days, and you have the weekly Sabbath. And then there's a third one. She says, this is actually a she. This 7,000 years. She says for almost 6,000 years, the earth's been corrupted by sin. By 2016, according to her calculation, the 6,000 years will be completed. People will be removed from the earth. Then the earth will have a Sabbath rest for 1,000 years. That was the particular prediction. And of course, it's not correct. But interestingly, what she has done, and this is similar to some others, is she'll bring in some proper concepts in with some improper concepts. Truly, there's 6 days you labor, do all your work, and the 7th day is a Sabbath. She's got that part right. And yes, there was a sabbatical that she was talking about. She also talks about Jubilee cycles, and she believes that the Jubilee cycles point to this particular year. And she also goes into Daniel 9:24. But basically, what she's doing is saying, okay, based on her guess of what this calculation of numbers are, this means the Great Tribulation is here. We'll get to what Jesus specifically said to look for. But one of the things he did not say to look for is, see who can come up with the best calculations. Years back, somebody was fairly famous. He's now deceased. His name was Harold Camping. And I may have had one of the largest articles debunking him out there. I think it was 60, 70, maybe 80 pages. Because he had various calculations, says this adds up to this, and this times this, and blah, 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 blah. Gets to some date that he thought Jesus was going to return. And of course, Jesus didn't come then. But people get caught up in this. They get caught up for different reasons. But one of the reasons is people sometimes want to believe the end is going to come because they have personal issues or they see things in society or both probably. Yet, the criteria we need to rely on is not our own understanding, but what the Word of God teaches. Now, here's... let me go back to the same Protestant source. Our world will end in the middle of 2016. Okay? Daniel 12 tells us these things were sealed until the end times, that Jesus would unseal them, reveal them with large increase in spiritual knowledge. So that's what this one person said. And again, that has not happened, and it's not going to happen. Well, now we've got somebody who claims to be in the Church of God. I'll say claims, and not actually mention who this individual is by name. But this particular individual has been saying it'll be within another year or two for at least 7 or 8 years, maybe longer. And here's one that this person wrote. There's an extremely high probability, at least 90%, that Christ will come in early 2020, and that the abomination will be set up in the Vatican in early October 2016, with the tribulation beginning by the end of 2016. That's what this one individual wrote, which is totally wrong. It's 100% wrong. The Great Tribulation cannot begin prior to 2020, and I'm going to explain why. And Jesus can't come until 3.5 years after the start of the Great Tribulation. And then this person who made this absurd statement wrote, "Brethren, the time of our judgment for following men blindly without question is at hand. Within the next months, I can proclaim zeal for God, but the choice is yours." He can proclaim his own understanding and his own foolishness. But what happens is people fall for emotional pitches. He's got a certain appeal he's trying to do to people, and it's wrong. And people are falling for it. He then changed this a little bit. Then he talks about prophecy of Daniel 8:14, 2,300 times, prophecies for now. The evening morning says first began in Genesis 1:5, etc., etc. He comes up with the 2,300 evenings and mornings are 2,300 days, and he picks some period of time talks about Alexander the Great's kingdom, etc. He starts to quote scriptures about destroying many when they're at peace. He'll stand against the prince of princes that is coming, Daniel 8:25. It'll be broken, Daniel 2:35. And he goes through all this stuff. And he comes up with an explanation. Coming forward 2,300 years from 280 BC and adding 1 for year 0, arrives the spring of 2021, when the sanctuary shall be cleansed by the coming of Jesus Christ. Now, subtracting 42 months, 1,260 days, shows that this final beast emperor will occupy Jerusalem beginning at the end of 2017. Now, of course, this is the same person who said 2016 before, but anyway, the 2017 part is also just as wrong. One of the things he mentioned was that there was going to be the Brexit vote, and of course that's happened. And he says that because Britain, very good chance will leave, and it has left, that it's going to have a crisis in Europe. And then the man of sin is going to go into the holy place, 75 days set up in the Vatican, the Great Tribulation of Matthew 24:15, that was the Christian he mentioned, begin. Then along this is a defeat of radical Islam and a movement toward Mideast peace deal, 1 Thessalonians 5:3. These events are right in line with the date of late 2017 for the start of the tribulation, followed by the coming of the Messiah 42 months later in 2021. Brethren, the writing is on the wall. Well, that was his writing, and again, it'll be wrong. And it's going to be wrong because he, like many other people, has relied on his own understanding, has not looked at what the Bible actually says in terms of what the criteria are. Now, before I get to all the biblical criteria, let me read something else. What I'm actually reading is from the Bible. As a matter of fact, you might want to follow along. Let's go to 2 Timothy chapter 3, starting verse 1. Various ones, people in the Church of God, people outside the Church of God, look around at society and they see all kinds of issues and problems and say, wait a second, this isn't right. We can't keep going on like this. In the United States, for example, there's massive debt. There's economic crises over in Europe. Russia's having some issues right now. China's having some issues. They look at what's going on in terms of moral decay, what I call celebrity porn, women who are wearing less and less. You've got the LGBTQ agenda. You've got all kinds of increase in various forms of sexual immorality. You've got the losing of religious freedoms in places like the United States, with more and more court decisions going against what would be considered beliefs that have some basis in the Bible. So people see that and say, well, this is bad. This means the Great Tribulation is here. Well, no, it doesn't mean that. It means it's getting closer, but it's not here yet. And for example, in 2 Timothy chapter 3, the Apostle Paul warns, "But know this, that in the last days perilous times will come." And I'll say that we're in perilous times. For men are going to be lovers of themselves, lovers of money, boasters, proud, blasphemers. If you've watched elections in various countries, you've seen that. Unthankful, unholy, unloving, unforgiving, slanderers without self-control, brutal, despisers of good. We're seeing more of that. Traitors, headstrong, haughty, lovers of pleasure more than lovers of God. And what gets me about politicians who profess Christianity but also profess the LGBTQ agenda, it says, having a form of godliness but denying its power, from such people turn away. We certainly do seem to be in perilous times. But what about what Jesus said about, knowing when it is or not knowing when it is? What did Jesus actually say? I've had this come up from time to time. If you take your Bibles and go to Mark chapter 13, verse 32, I want to read something here. When I've written in the past, the Great Tribulation, for example, was not going to begin in 2016. Someone wrote and said, you can't know this because, quoted Mark 13:32. But of that day and hour knows no one knows, not even the angels in heaven, nor the Son, but only the Father. Now, the date and the hour I haven't said. I just said that based on Jesus' criteria, it wasn't possible the Great Tribulation could begin in 2016. Now, there's some proofs that we can know when this is going to occur. Scriptural proofs. And so, let's first go over to something that the Apostle Paul wrote in 1 Thessalonians chapter 5. Because, again, a common objection for people who are not particularly interested in prophecy is you can't know the date and hour, so don't bother, and if you say anything, you're wrong, or you're contradicting what Jesus said. And I'm going to go show now from the Bible that that's not a contradiction of what Jesus taught. Because Scripture can't be broken when we look at the Bible here a little, there a little. And for example, notice what the Apostle Paul wrote. 1 Thessalonians 5, starting verse 1. It says, but concerning the times and seasons, brethren, I have no need that I should write to you. You have no need I should write to you. And they didn't, because they weren't going to be around at that time anyway. But he says, for you yourselves know perfectly the day of the Lord so comes as a thief in the night. So when they say peace and safety, then sudden destruction comes upon them, as labor pains upon a pregnant woman, and they shall not escape. So Paul's saying, look, those who are outside, they're not going to know anything. They're not going to know. It's going to come on them like a thief in the night. They'll be deceived. There'll be false proclamations of peace. They'll believe that, and they're not going to do well. And so he said, well, you Christians are the same way. No, he did not. Verse 4, but you, brethren, are not in darkness, that this day should overtake you as a thief. Huh? So Paul's saying, you're not supposed to be like the world, who has no clue on when the end is going to be. He says, you're all sons of light and sons of the day. We are not of the night nor of the darkness. Therefore, let us not sleep as others do, but let us watch and be sober. So the Apostle Paul said, you're not supposed to be like those who don't have a clue. You need to watch. He says, I don't have to tell you. He says, you've got no reason for me to tell you when, Paul says, but I will tell you you're supposed to watch. And if you watch, you won't have this happen to you like it's going to happen in the world, where it'd be overcome like a thief in the night and you don't have a clue. He says, if you pay attention, you'll know. Now, secondly, let's go to Matthew chapter 24. The idea of wanting to know when the Great Tribulation is going to be and when Jesus is going to return is not a new one. Not only is it not a new question, It was a question that was actually recorded in the Bible for us to see the question, as well as Jesus' answer to the question. And if we weren't supposed to know it all, I don't believe Jesus would have answered the question and listed out the reasons or things that you should be watching for. Verse 3, Matthew 24. Now as he, that's Jesus, sat in the Mount of Olives, his disciples came to him privately, saying, "Tell us, when will these things be? What will be the sign of your coming and at the end of this age?" Now Jesus didn't say, look, there's nothing to look for at all. It's going to be no time, you'll have no clue. It's just going to happen. It kind of reminds me, I think it was Tim LaHaye I saw once on Glenn Beck's TV show. This is years and years ago, and Glenn Beck had a regular TV show. I think he's got his own channel or something now. But Glenn Beck asked this person who was part of the Left Behind series of books, what's the next thing we should be looking for to happen? Tim LaHaye says, the rapture. And Glenn Beck's like, well, isn't there anything else? It's like, no, the rapture. Well, apparently, Mr. LaHaye didn't seem to believe, at least certainly not the way we in the Continuing Church of God teach it, believe what Jesus said in Matthew 24. Because Jesus starts to list various things. He tells you what's more critical than others. Some things that are more critical than others. And all the things that Jesus has mentioned in Matthew 24 have not happened yet. And so for people like Tim LaHaye to say, oh, well, the next thing is the so-called rapture or the return of Jesus Christ from the clouds, that's not the case. There's a bunch of things that have to happen before Jesus can return. And it haven't happened yet. And we're going to go through some of that today. I think I've got enough notes to probably go about 4 or 5 hours, but as most of you know, I don't do that. And so I'm going to skip over a lot of things, but I'm going to go through enough scriptures that if you have a sincere interest in knowing when the Great Tribulation will begin, what are some of the things you're supposed to look for, and some of the ways that you'll know that you can actually know, as opposed to, oh, I can't possibly know because Jesus said he doesn't know the date and the hour. Anyways, getting to what Jesus answered and said to them, this is Matthew 24, starting verse 4. Take heed that no one deceives you. For many are going to come in my name saying, I'm Christ, and they're going to deceive many. Well, I just read you a little bit earlier a couple of people who were convinced, one, that the Great Tribulation had to begin by the middle of 2016, and we're in the second half of 2016 now, so it hasn't happened. And then someone else said, well, it's 90% chance it'll be in 2016, and then, well, late 2017. And that's just not true. And these aren't the only ones. And again, I mentioned Harold Camping. He had hundreds of thousands, at least, who seemed to follow his message. I actually knew somebody who'd been deceived by Harold Camping. Actually, I knew a couple different people. One who fell for his original calculations decades before. And then another one who was influenced by him, but at least she wasn't a nut. And I knew her for quite a few years, and we chatted about this. I said to her, there's no possible way that Harold Camping can be right about Jesus' return. And she was polite to me. She'd hoped that Mr. Camping was correct, but Mr. Camping, of course, was not correct and didn't happen as he said it. So anyway, Jesus says that people are going to claim Christianity and they're going to deceive many. And that's happened. Now, sometimes people are going to point to wars and rumors of wars. Jesus said, those are going to happen, but see that you're not troubled. For all these things must come to pass, but the end is not yet. So just because there's wars or rumors of wars doesn't mean the end is here yet. There will be a war that will start to trigger. There are a couple of wars, actually, that'll be pretty much triggers of this. But wars throughout history, most of the wars, including World War I and World War II, they were not it. In verse 7, Jesus says, nation's going to rise against nation, and kingdom against kingdom. There's going to be famines and pestilences and earthquakes in various places. And we've had famines and pestilences throughout history, and if you're undergoing major pestilence, let's say like the Black Death, you kind of wonder if this could be the end. or famine, because it's horrible to be hungry for extended periods of time. As far as earthquakes in various places, I think I heard recently that there are now more earthquakes in, I believe, Oklahoma than there are California. Maybe that's an exaggeration, but there's a lot more earthquakes in some parts that there weren't before. But does this mean the Great Tribulation is here yet? No. Jesus said, verse 8, all these are the beginning of sorrows. Remember, the Apostle Paul wrote in 2 Timothy 3, the last days, perilous times will come. The perilous times tend to correlate with the beginning of sorrows. And that's the period of time that we currently seem to be in. It's not the Great Tribulation. And we're going to see some things that go wrong. And, by the way, we'll see some things that look like they're going to go right. And some things will seem better in other parts of the world. It's not all doom and gloom between now and then. But then Jesus said, then they're going to deliver you up to tribulation and kill you, and you'll be hated by all nations for my name's sake. And a lot of people who write me about the Great Tribulation don't seem to have a clue that if they're true faithful Christians, that they're subject to tribulation persecution. They just want to know that Jesus is going to come soon and take them away or hide them or whatever is going to happen. And the idea that they're probably going to go, if they're the most faithful Christians, that they're subject to persecution, they don't want to hear that. But if you're a true Christian, especially if Philadelphia are a Christian, you are subject to persecution, particularly prior to the beginning of the Great Tribulation. Verse 10, then many will be offended and betray one another and will hate one another. Now this actually correlates with something that's discussed in the book of Daniel, Daniel chapter 11. So let's go over there. I was going to go to Daniel 11 later, and I still will probably go there later. But then we'll get to this. We see in verse 28 that when the person who's going to be the future king of the north returns his land with great riches, he's going to be moved against the holy covenant. He's going to be moved against Christians, real Christians. These Christians of the holy covenant, because in my view, they're going to be explaining what the king of the north is doing. They're going to say he's rising up. He is going to support the Antichrist, and he and the Antichrist power are going to be together. And he's going to return and show regard to those who forsake the holy covenant. So we read this, and this actually is very similar to what Jesus was talking about here in Matthew 24, verses 9 and 10. And I'm going to skip over down to verse 32. Those who do wickedly against the covenant, he's going to corrupt with flattery. But the people who know their God shall be strong and carry out great exploits. And those are the people who understand shall instruct many. Yet for days they shall fall by the sword and the flame. And by the way, I left out the word many the second time. That is not in the original Hebrew. It is a mistake. It should not be in there. It's an additional word. It's in italics in my Bible because it's not supposed to be there. By captivity and plundering. When they fall, they shall be aided with little help, but many will join them by intrigue. And some of them, of understanding, are going to fall to refine them, purify them, make them white until the time of the end, because it's still for the appointed time. And I'll get to what verse in Daniel 11 later. The Great Tribulation begins. But this persecution that I'm reading about happens prior to the time of the Great Tribulation, as does the persecution I was reading about in Matthew chapter 24. Then Jesus says, many false prophets are going to rise up and deceive many. And the false prophet that's talked about in the book of Revelation will also be rising up around that time. Verse 12, because lawlessness will abound, the love of many will grow cold. But he who endures the end shall be saved. The next part I'd like to talk about for just a moment or two or more. In verse 14, and this gospel of the kingdom shall be preached in all the world as a witness to all nations, and then the end will come. Okay, so sometime after this gospel of the kingdom will be preached in all the world as a witness, then the end will come. And by the end, I believe this is a reference to the appointed time of the end that we were just reading about in Daniel chapter 11, which starts with the time of Jacob's trouble, talked about in Jeremiah 30, verse 7, or known as the Great Tribulation. Jesus is going to be mentioned in Matthew 24, verse 21. So we see the gospel of the kingdom will preach in all the world as a witness, and then the end will come. A lot of people who claim to know when the Great Tribulation is going to begin seem to have a problem that I've noticed, and that is they don't seem to understand that the gospel of the kingdom has to be proclaimed as a witness. Now, there's a couple different views of this. The Roman Catholic view is that they've proclaimed the gospel, or their version of the gospel, to the world, so this can happen anytime. I mean, this is not time sensitive. Within Protestantism, there tend to be two different views of this. One view is that, similar to the Catholic one, it's already been done, so there's no time sequence to this. The other view is that once all the world hears the gospel, or a version of the gospel, perhaps because the Bible or the New Testament has been translated into every known language on the planet, which actually seems to be a view of at least one group I've heard out there. Once that happens, then the end can come. That's one of the reasons why a particular group is going around diligently trying to translate the Bible or the New Testament to even more languages. There aren't that many languages that they haven't covered, and the relatively few that they haven't covered, I think are less than half 1%, or maybe 1% of the population of the planet. That's their view. Well, what's the Church of God view? What's the continuing Church of God view? Well, the continuing Church of God view is that Matthew 24:14 has not been fulfilled in its entirety. Some who were part of the old radio or worldwide Church of God understand that, but sadly some don't. Some believe because Herbert Armstrong said that he got the gospel of the kingdom to all nations, therefore this particular verse was fulfilled. Well, there's a couple of issues with that. First of all, he's been dead for over 30 years, and the end hasn't come. The end being the Great Tribulation has not come. And secondly, before he died, he appointed others to continue to proclaim the gospel of the kingdom of God. He said a greater work was going to be done after he was here, and within the last year or two before he died, he said there's going to be a greater work that was to be done that he didn't do, that he referred to as a short work. And this particular short work is the final warning message at the time of the end. I guess I'll talk about this for just a half a moment. What do we in the continuing Church of God have to do with that? Well, on the one hand, we could say to you, I can look you in the eye and tell you, look in the eyes this way, and say, look, our web pages have been accessed by people in over 220 some odd countries and territories as measured by AW stats. Therefore, we've gotten the gospel of the kingdom to all the nations of the world. And to a degree, that's true. I can also look at this camera here and to say that we've done basically the same thing according to YouTube. It's 215. Depends how you count. We've got different channels, and I haven't actually tried to combine both channels together to see if there are some that one channel reached that the other didn't. But basically, nearly all countries and territories on the planet, if not all of them, or people in all of them, have actually watched at least part of one of our videos. But I don't believe that's sufficient. Now, is it up to me to decide? No. It's up to God to decide. When He believes that the gospel of the kingdom will have been preached to the world as a witness for the end to come, He'll have to determine how much of a witness is necessary for the end to come. So in the continuing Church of God, are we just sitting on our hands and just waiting and think, okay, well, we'll just wait, we won't do anything, because God will just do it when He's going to do it? Well, there are people outside the continuing Church of God who seem to believe that. They think that they don't need to support God's work at the time of the end, and that somehow God's going to protect them anyway from whatever is going to happen, and they don't need to be involved in that because they don't trust churches, they don't trust leaders, and they don't trust all that. They can make a variety of excuses, but those are excuses. I'm not going to read the scriptures right now, but Jesus blasted the Laodiceans, which is the bulk of the Christians at the time of the end, and in Revelation 3, verses 14 through 18, for being satisfied with not doing a Philadelphia era work. And the Philadelphia era work is to get the gospel of the kingdom to the world as a witness. Now, one of the things that happened to the Continuing Church of God in 2016 is we put out a new booklet, which you can see here, The Gospel of the Kingdom of God. Now, you say, fine, you put this out in English. Other churches have some booklets or books out. We can argue whether or not our booklet is better. Of course, I think it is, but than others. But what have we done differently than others? How could we do something to fulfill Matthew 24:14 that other groups don't seem to be doing? At least none that I'm aware of. Just so happened that this week, and I'd already decided to talk about the Great Tribulation because we're out in the second half of 2016, that we received a translation of this booklet into 94 languages. Now, some groups are content thinking English is enough. If you get it in English, that's sufficient. Well, only 950 million people know much English in the world. That's less than 1 out of 7 people. Well, if you add the 94 languages that we've just got, plus we've got, I think, 4 more in progress, plus English, plus I hope a couple others. So we're looking to have this booklet in over 100 different languages. This will be available through Amazon, also be available at the websites for free, of course. So when people are ready to pay attention to the Church of God message, we'll have it out there. And now we don't have all these up yet. We just got these in this week. We have to format them, put covers on them, etc., do various other things. It'll take us quite some time to get through all this. But we are preparing to make it so that the gospel of the kingdom will be preached to the world as a witness, and the end will come. And what I believe will trigger the reading of our information is that when the king of the north starts to do various things that are listed in Daniel chapter 11, and when we in the Continuing Church of God identify what's going on, we'll get a tremendous amount of media attention, and people want to find out, well, what do these people really believe? What do they really teach? And by having our information in, I'm hoping, over 100 different languages, we will help provide a sufficient witness, and of course God will be the one who will decide. Why spend so much time talking about the gospel in the middle of a Great Tribulation sermon? Because people seem to use an American expression, miss the forest of the trees. There are people who are so paranoid about when they think the Great Tribulation is going to begin that they will not do what they need to do for themselves. They don't realize that if they're just trying to protect themselves, it's not going to work. And Jesus said, whoever seeks to save his own life is going to lose it. But he who loses his life for his sake and the gospel's will gain it. Are you actually doing what you're supposed to do to support the gospel? The proclamation, the good news of the kingdom of God? That God does have a solution to the problems facing humanity? Now, I'll read something that Jesus said back in Matthew 24. So after you're going through a lot of things, and I'll come back to some more of these scriptures, I'm going to skip over to verse 45. Jesus said, Who then is a faithful and wise servant whose master makes ruler over his household to give them food in due season? And right now we're working on putting out food in due season, such as the gospel booklet. We also have other booklets on other subjects. Blessed is that servant whom his master, when he comes, finds so doing. So when Jesus comes, he expects you to be functioning as his servant, supporting his work. Assuredly, I say to you that he will make him ruler over all his goods. If you've got others, he says, they're going to say, the master returns, delays his coming. So you don't have to be so careful about that. It doesn't matter, because I've been told Jesus is going to come every year for a zillion years. The Great Tribulation is going to come every year for a zillion years. It's never happened. I don't really care, and I'm not going to really do it. And I don't care what anybody tries to preach or tell me, because I can't trust any of them. Well, I'm not telling you to trust me, but you better trust Jesus' words. And if you don't pay attention to Jesus' words, let's put it down here. There will be weeping and gnashing of teeth. You can read the other parts in between there should you want to do that. Now, as far as the Great Tribulation itself, again, Jesus gave signs. So first we have the beginning of sorrows that we went through. Then he says, verse 15 of Matthew 24, "Therefore, when you see the abomination of desolation spoken of by Daniel the prophet standing in the holy place," that whoever reads, let him understand. I'm going to stop right here. I skipped over Daniel 11:31 on purpose, which is related to this. But Jesus is tying in events in the book of Daniel to Matthew 24. And certain events in the book of Daniel have not happened yet. Once that happens, then Jesus gives a more immediate response. Then those who in Judea flee the mountains. Let those who are on a housetop not go down and take anything out of his house. And let him in the field not go back to get his clothes. But woe to those who are pregnant and those who are nursing babies in those days. And pray that your flight not be in the winter nor in the Sabbath. Now, I always find this last part there very interesting. Jesus is telling people, when the Great Tribulation happens, pray that it doesn't happen on the Sabbath. I've seen Protestant commentators say, oh, this is because Jesus is talking about Jews in Jerusalem only, so that's what this only references to. Well, Jesus is talking to Christians, and he wrote these. What he said was written down for Christians, not Jews in the last day. I mean, the Jews are certainly welcome to read the Bible, as are Muslims and atheists and everyone else wants to read it. But Jesus is saying to pray that your flight not be on the Sabbath. Well, people don't believe Jesus is the Messiah. Why would they listen to him? Why would they pray this? And why would people pray it if the Sabbath still wasn't applicable at the end times? I'm not going to go into the Sabbath in any more depth on that, but I thought I'd throw that in here. Anyway, now notice verse 21. For then there will be great tribulation, such as not been since the beginning of the world until this time, no, nor ever shall be. So Jesus starts giving a sequence in Matthew 24, starting in verses 3 and 4. Comes down here and says, okay, all these things, what has to happen before the Great Tribulation. And we could go through more verses in there to find out what's supposed to happen before Jesus actually returns. Now, it is true in verse 9 that a tribulation is mentioned in Matthew 24, but I think that tribulation is talking about the persecutions of Philadelphia era Christians that we were reading about in Daniel chapter 11. Now, perhaps I should comment that as far as the Philadelphia era Christians, let's go to Revelation chapter 3. There's a couple things I want to mention here. In the book of Revelation, 7 churches are mentioned. Ephesus, Smyrna, Pergamos, Thyatira, Sardis, Philadelphia, Laodicea. Yeah, I remember them in order. And there are some people, definitely from the last 3 or 4 of the era, remnant of the last 4 eras around at the time of the end. But only one gives a promise like this. Revelation 3 verse 7, and to the angel of the church of Philadelphia write, these things says he who is holy, who is true, he who has the key of David, he who opens and no one shuts, and he who shuts and no one opens. I know your works. So one thing that distinguishes the Philadelphians from the others is the work. What kind of work? I've set before you an open door, and no one can shut it, for you have a little strength, you've kept my word and not denied my name. So we're talking about a group that's doing the work, going through the open door, proclaiming the gospel. And again, one of the things we're doing in the continuing Church of God is to do this in as many languages as we can. And I'll skip down to verse 10. Because you have kept my command to persevere, I will also keep you from the hour of trial which shall come upon the whole world to test those who dwell on the earth. Behold, I'm coming quickly. So you see, Jesus ties in his return to Philadelphia Christians being protected somewhere. Now, there's a bunch of arguments that some of the rapturists have, which are total nonsense. about what's going to happen at the time of the end. And they think all Christians are going to be protected, and that's simply not the case. I just went over to Revelation chapter 12, so why don't you go over there, starting in verse 13. Because I wanted you to see a sequence in Revelation chapter 12. Starting in verse 13. And I believe this ties in with Matthew 24, starting around verse 9. When the dragon saw he had been cast to the earth, he persecuted the woman who gave birth to the male child. But the woman was given 2 wings of a great eagle, that she might fly in the wilderness to her place, where she is nourished for a time, time and half a time, 3.5 years, from the presence of the serpent. So the serpent spewed out water out of his mouth, like a flood after the woman. They might cause her to be carried away by the flood. But the earth helped the woman, and the earth opened its mouth and swallowed up the flood, which the dragon had spewed out of his mouth. So we've got the woman, the church here, a particular church. It's a Christian church, the Christian church, if you will, the faithful remnant of the Christian church that's around. And they're protected in the wilderness for a time, time and half a time, 3.5 years. The same period of time that Jesus promised to protect the Philadelphians. Now I realize, because he calls this the hour of trial. He didn't actually say the time particularly, but he called this the hour of trial. Now you say, well, this means all Christians get protected. No, they do not. I'm not going to read all of Jesus' messages to the other churches, but the church of Sardis, Jesus warned that they're not going to know because they're losing what they know. And Jesus warned the Laodiceans they had to repent. And he has kind of a mixed message for the Thyatirans there. Everybody, all end-time Christians are not promised to be protected. And the reason I came to Revelation 12 on this is to show you that by reading the next verse. And the dragon was enraged with the woman, and he went to make war with the rest of her offspring. Who are the rest of the church's offspring are those who keep the commandments of God and have the testimony of Jesus Christ. Aren't those Christians? I've heard 2 different arguments about this also, for those who wonder about this. One is, these must be converted Jews who converted during the time of the Great Tribulation. But no, these are from the beginning. Immediately, at the start of the tribulation, the dragon is going for everybody who's still around. So these are not Jews who just became converted that day. Some Protestants want to claim this as Jews because they've got a problem here with some of their theology. Many Protestant leaders, if not most Protestant leaders, do not believe you actually have to keep God's commandments. They believe they're done away. Now, many Protestants themselves think they should keep them, but I'm not going to go into if they know how to keep them or not. But this passage here says that Christians are those who have the testimony of Jesus Christ to keep God's commandments. So we're talking about true Church of God Christians here. And they're not being protected. They're subject to Satan at this stage. So that's going to happen once the Great Tribulation begins. And so those are some of the steps that we're going to look at. Now I'd like to go and read a few other things as far as why you can have an idea of when the Great Tribulation will begin. You don't have to go there, but first I'm going to read Matthew 25, verse 13, what Jesus said. It says, "Watch therefore, for you know neither the day nor the hour in which the Son of Man is coming." Now, why would Jesus tell people to watch if they couldn't possibly have any idea? Well, he gave all those signs in Matthew 24, and he referred to the book of Daniel in Matthew 24. Here's another one. Luke 21, verse 36. "Watch therefore," this is Jesus' words, "and pray always that you may be counted worthy to escape all these things that will come to pass, and to stand before the Son of Man." Well, if you hadn't paid attention to what Jesus said, he had a similar list in Matthew 24 as he has in Luke 21. If you're not paying attention to those signs, how are you going to know? And Jesus said to watch and to pray. He didn't say, watch and pray that I'm going to protect you directly. He says, watch and pray that you may be counted worthy to escape. If you're praying if you should be counted worthy to escape, Jesus is basically telling you, You need to examine yourself to be sure that you're living as a true Christian, Philadelphia area Christian, so that you could escape these things. I will read this. This is regarding the church of Sardis, Revelation 3:3. Remember therefore how you have received and heard. Hold fast and repent. Therefore, if you will not watch, I will come upon you as a thief, and you will not know what hour I will come upon you. So that's consistent with what the Apostle Paul told the Thessalonians. He says, if you're a Christian, you should know, you should be sober, you should be watching and knowing what's going to happen. But if you don't watch, you're going to be like the heathen. You will not know when it's going to happen. Now let's go to Mark 13. Mark 13 is kind of interesting to me because I've had people tell me it doesn't mean what it says. Mark 13, starting in verse 33. Mark 13:33. Take heed, watch and pray, for you don't know what the time is. It's like a man going to the far country who left his house and gave authority to his servants and to each his work, and commanded the doorkeeper to watch. Watch therefore, for you do not know when the master of the house is coming, in the evening or in the midnight, or at the crowing of the rooster, or in the morning, lest coming suddenly he finds you sleeping. What I say to you all, watch. Now what's interesting about this is what Jesus told people after Mark 13:32, which is, you don't know the day and the hour. So people will quote, you don't know the date and the hour, therefore you can't possibly know. But if they've read the next few verses, Jesus is saying, since you don't know, you need to watch. Now just think about this for a second. Let's say that for some reason we knew that Jesus is going to return in 2026. Okay? Then you wouldn't watch for any signs. Why bother? If we knew Jesus is coming, I'll make up the date, October 1st, 2026. If we knew for sure that that's when Jesus was going to come, and we knew the Great Tribulation was going to begin 3.5 years before then, we wouldn't have to pay attention to any of the signs. We'd probably plan our life until when it was time to flee. Presume we'd be those that would flee, and go and do so. So just because they didn't know what day, an hour, or year necessarily when Jesus was going to come, Jesus said this is what you need to watch for. And that's what we still need to watch for. Now, I do believe in the 6,000-year plan followed by a 1,000-year millennial reign of Jesus Christ, like the first woman I was quoting who said the Great Tribulation had to begin by the middle of 2016. Okay? But just because she has some parts right and has some scriptures that she alludes to doesn't prove anything. Same thing with that person who claimed to be in the Church of God. There's other people who claim to be in the Church of God who come up with various dates and calculations, and they've flat out been wrong. Jesus didn't say, here's what you should do. Look for the man or woman who is the smartest math person that you know, who will look for various codes in this book, or add up various numbers in this book, and tell you, this is the number, focus on that, which is whatever the date is going to be. He didn't say that. He said, these are the things you're going to be seeing. And the gospel's got to be preached to the world as a witness. And then once that happens, you see the abomination of desolation spoken of by Daniel the prophet, standing in the holy place. Let he who reads understand. When that happens, then you know it's time. He didn't say the other things. I was debating for this particular sermon if I was going to spend a lot of time on the abomination of desolation spoken of by Daniel the prophet standing in a holy place. I decided that for this instant I don't need to do that yet, and I'll do that in another time, because I look at my notes and I've been through not many of them so far, and I still have a lot of stuff I want to cover. But Jesus said to watch, and events were listed to watch. And I don't care how religious somebody might sound. I don't care what their titles are or claimed titles, or how long they've been in the Church of God or not been in the Church of God. If they're not teaching what the Bible says about this, you can't rely on them. And again, Jesus listed specific signs to be looking for. And some of those I've gone through. Now, another thing that's interesting about Mark, you can read Mark 13, verse 8. Why don't we just read it together, the whole verse. Now, verse 7. But when you hear of wars and rumors of wars, this is Jesus talking, do not be troubled, for such things must happen, but the end is not yet. For nation will rise against nation, kingdom against kingdom. There will be earthquakes in various places. There will be famines and troubles. These are the beginning of sorrows. And so troubles are part of this. We've seen various troubles going on. There's various people who are forecasting food shortages, energy shortages, population growth issues, perfect storms of things coming together and causing a variety of disasters. A lot of these things people have looked at. I've seen reports from NASA that suggest we might have problems. I've seen reports from Oxford University, I think it was Oxford. Yeah, it was Oxford. And others who've said, look, various bad things can happen, and maybe they'll happen in 2020, 2025, 2030, 2040, whatever times that they're looking at. So it's not like the things Jesus said aren't going to happen, because they are starting to happen. But again, as far as when the Great Tribulation will be, it's not until various things that were listed. I found something that I thought was kind of interesting in a writing by an Eastern Orthodox scholar. This Eastern Orthodox scholar has translated something. This is a conversation between a couple of people. One of them is Epiphanius, who I believe is the same Epiphanius who wrote church history information. And he asked somebody who's called Andrew Fool for Christ about the end of the world. So let me read something about this. Epiphanius says, "When will come the end of the world? What are the beginning of sorrows, and when shall they take place? From what signs and events shall humanity be able to know that the end of the world is near, and what signs shall be manifest?" So you ask, how do I know when this beginning of sorrows is supposed to be and all that? Now this guy called Andrew Fool for Christ says, "Now son, how can I relate to you without tears the events of the beginning of sorrows and the end of the world? During the end times, God will reveal as king a certain poor man. This man will rule. Happiness will reign like it did in the days of Noah. People become very rich. The entire world will fear this king. He'll pursue all persons of the Jewish religion out of Constantinople, and the people rejoice like the time of Noah until the deluge came." So what are you talking about here? Well, I mentioned before in Daniel 11 talks about a leader called the King of the North rising up. But various Roman Catholic prophecies and Greek Orthodox prophecies, by the way, talk about an individual who they like, who sounds a lot like that particular leader the Bible warns against. And it's interesting that the Eastern Orthodox prophecy says he's going to rise up during the time of the beginning of sorrows. And I believe we are during the time of the beginning of sorrows now. I believe this particular man is alive now. I've got an idea who I think he is, but I'm not certain about that. But the part I always found interesting about reading some of these things in Eastern Orthodox, they're talking about the time of Noah. And I didn't read all of this, but Jesus, in his accounts about the Great Tribulation, talks about it would be like the days of Noah. People will be doing things and they won't know. And people will not know what's going to happen until it's too late. Now, I am planning on going through a list of things that you can go through to know when the Great Tribulation is going to begin. But I'd like to read something first from the book of Ezekiel. And actually, there's a few other things I want to get to before I get that list. Let's go to Ezekiel chapter 5. Starting in verse 15. "So it shall be a reproach, a taunt, a lesson, and an astonishment to the nations that are all around you. When I execute judgments among you in anger and in fury and in furious rebukes, I, Eternal, have spoken. When I send against them the terrible arrows of famine, which shall be for destruction. So notice that God is going to send to some descendants of Israel famine for the purpose of destruction. And I will destroy you. I'll increase the famine upon you and cut off your supply of bread. So I've sent against you famine and wild beasts, and they will bereave you. Pestilence and blood shall pass through you. And I will bring the sword against you. I, the Lord, have spoken. Now this is a slightly different order that we see in the beginning of sorrows list that Jesus had given. And what we're seeing here are some prophecies of things not just affecting some poor people in parts of Asia or Africa or in Haiti or something, but to certain descendants of the children of Israel. So we may well see GMO crop failures in places like the United States and Canada and the UK that could cause some serious famines and some other things that could weaken these nations, make us susceptible to what? To be taken over by the sword. The Great Tribulation will most likely begin with some kind of a massive attack on the United States, United Kingdom, and or Canada, with Australia and New Zealand being affected probably shortly thereafter, or maybe even simultaneously by other powers. I don't know that for certain yet. I could go through this, and I'm not going to, but many people don't understand the modern identification of Israel. We have at the cogwriter.com website articles about the tribes of Israel and what's going to happen to them, so people will understand how the United States, United Kingdom, Australia, New Zealand, Canada, and then others like the Netherlands and Finland and Sweden and Norway and Switzerland, Denmark, Ireland, and other places will be affected, as well as the whole rest of the world, including Africa and Asia and Europe. And that pretty much includes everybody. I think I haven't missed a place. Antarctica, I guess. I don't have any specific prophecies about Antarctica that I could refer to. But anyway, also, this particular sermon, some of what I'm saying is in an article about the Great Tribulation at the cogwriter.com website. That's www.cogwriter.com website. And I'll also try to put a link there at the YouTube location, because this is intended as a YouTube sermon for that. Now, I guess before I go further, one thing I have is people get confused about Israel in this generation. We have at our Bible News Prophecy YouTube channel, our sister channel, if you will, about this 1948 thing in Israel. And let me simply say again, what people say is that this was the start of the end times, and Israel began as a nation in 1948 in modern times. And if a generation is 70 years, then you've got the situation where you're almost past that. And how long is a generation? But I'm not going to go into all that because I think it's relevant. I think the fact that we have the nation of Israel makes it possible for certain prophecies to be fulfilled, yet its timing didn't start the clock. Like I've heard a few people say that started the clock, and I flat out don't see that from Scripture. All right, let's go to this direction, I think. And that is what is the next event that we're really looking to see. And now there's a bunch of different events that have to take place. As I mentioned before, Matthew 24:14 has to be fulfilled. The gospel of the kingdom and preach the world as a witness, the end will come. Now many people are just sitting around just hoping that's just going to happen somehow, and that God will make it happen. Well, God certainly will make it happen. If you're not going to be part of it, that's unfortunate for you, but it's going to happen. But that's not the next time event. There's a bunch of events that we will see. But one event that we're looking to see happen is something that the Bible talks about in Daniel chapter 9. So let's go to Daniel chapter 9, starting in verse 26. It says, "And the people of the prince who is to come," this is the second half of it, "shall destroy the city and the sanctuary, and the end of it will be with a flood. Until the end of the war, desolations are determined." That was fulfilled in 70 AD. People of the prince who is to come, in this case it was the Romans, they destroyed the city, that was Jerusalem, and the sanctuary, and they stopped that. But notice that this is the people of a prince who was supposed to come. Well, that prince was not there in 70 AD. He wasn't there in whatever it is BC when Daniel wrote this. This is a prince who is to come. We're going to hear some things about this particular prince in verse 27. He's going to confirm a covenant with many for 1 week. So he's going to endorse some kind of a deal for 1 week. Now, most prophecy watchers correctly realize that this 1 week is talking about 7 years. And most people believe this should be some kind of a peace deal. Now, we have a full sermon at the Continuing COG channel that you can watch about that. We also have an article at the COGwriter.com website that you can go into that in more depth. I'm not going to go into much more depth on that here, but I'm going to say that we've got this deal. It has not happened yet. We might have to see a regional war in the Middle East prior to this happening. We might see Iran attack Jerusalem, for example, one way or the other. The sanctions are been lifted. Many of the sanctions have been lifted off of Iran. They've gotten access to more of their funds. Last thing I read, they didn't get all their money yet, but they're trying to get their funds together. They hope to improve their economy. They hope to buy more weapons. And the Bible doesn't say it has to be Iran being in a war that leads to a peace deal, but there's other scriptures that suggest that perhaps Iran will attack the tiny nation we call Israel. And because of that, we might see Israel, who's been opposed to most of the so-called peace deals that the West has tried to cram down its throat, decide that it doesn't have a choice but to accept some kind of a deal. But anyway, there's going to be some kind of a deal, and a leader who's called a prince is going to confirm this for a year. But in the middle of the year, so roughly 3.5 years, he's going to bring an end to the sacrifice and offering, and on the wing of abominations shall be one who makes desolate, even until the consummation which is determined is poured out in the desolate. So let's go to Daniel chapter 11, just a few pages over. We read about Jesus saying in Matthew 24:15, we see abomination, desolation spoken of by Daniel the prophet. Now we're reading about it here in Daniel 9:27. But you can also read about it in Daniel 11:31. And I'm going to read this here. Well, actually, maybe I'll step back a verse to... he's still called he all the time. Okay. Verse 31. And forces are going to be mustered by him. Now this him is that guy who was called the prince in Daniel 9:26. Now later, in other parts of in Daniel 11:27, he's also called the king. So apparently when he confirms his covenant, he's not the top guy. He's not the beast of the sea of Revelation 13. He's not yet the king of the north. He's going to not be a major player when he confirms the covenant for a week. Why do I mention that? Because a lot of Protestant and other prophecy watchers think they're going to know when this deal has been confirmed. Therefore, they'll know when this is going to be. I'm telling you, the Bible says he is a prince, and later he becomes a king. So he could just be one of a leader, some leader or some bureaucrat that accepts a particular deal when he does it. And that may not make the national news, international news, if he's not. It probably might make the news, but it won't be considered significant. Maybe it wasn't his deal. Okay. Well, anyway, we find out that forces are going to be mustered by this guy, and he's going to defile the sanctuary fortresses. Then he'll take away the daily sacrifices and place the abomination of desolation. Then we read about the persecutions and stuff. Again, that's consistent with what I was reading before in Matthew 24 that Jesus was talking about, verses 8, 9, 10, I think. Now we'll skip through some of that and then go down to verse 36. This king is going to do according to his own will. He's going to exalt and magnify himself against every god, speak blasphemies against the God of gods. And you can read that about him also in Revelation chapter 13, verses 1 through 10. He's going to prosper till the wrath has been accomplished, for what's been determined shall be done. He's not going to regard the God of his father, or the desire of women, regard any God, for he's going to exalt himself above all. In his place, he's going to honor a God of fortresses, similar to what Emperor Constantine did, and a God which his fathers did not know. He's going to honor with gold, silver, precious stones, and pleasant things. I believe this is going to be a new religious order. I believe it's going to be a changed version of what's called Roman Catholicism. They're going to call itself Catholicism, but it's not going to be even modern Roman Catholicism. It's going to be a changed version of it. Now, as far as when does the Great Tribulation begin, it starts the next verse. Thus he shall act against the strongest fortresses with a foreign god, which he shall acknowledge and advance its glory. He shall cause them to rule over many and divide the land for gain. Well, the strongest fortresses in the 21st century, by the way, belong to the United States, and to a lesser degree its Anglo-Saxon allies. Now, this is what he does in verse 39. In verse 40, at the time of the end, King of the South is going to attack him. He's going to go back and fight against him, which you can read about there. So that's a little bit about some of the time factors that you could be looking towards to determine when the Great Tribulation might begin. The one Church of God individual, or claimed Church of God individual, who thinks that the Great Tribulation is going to start at the end of 2017 or 2016, we don't really communicate anymore, but in the past we had. And I would tell them, look, I'm typically in Europe a couple times a year. They're not ready for the King of the North yet. He's not there. They're just not set up. And in order for the Great Tribulation to begin, we need to have a King of the North and a King of the South. They're going to get together in Daniel 11:27. They're going to make some lying deal with each other. And what we're seeing now is the foundations of this arising. We're seeing with things such as the Islamic State, interest from the West to get the Islamic nations of North Africa and the Middle East to get together, form some type of military confederation. And Saudi Arabia has been working on that. Iran would like to do its own. But we're seeing the foundations being laid for a King of the South to rise up. But that hasn't happened yet. The Great Tribulation can't begin until there's a King of the South. That's one thing. The other thing is, of course, as I mentioned, well, before all that, I've mentioned we haven't seen the peace deal confirmed. We don't have the peace deal, and it hasn't been confirmed. Sometime after that deal is confirmed, we're going to see regular animal sacrifices in Israel. We don't have that now. Basically, in Israel, it's kind of funny how the courts have ruled this. The courts have ruled, you have a right to sacrifice. However, in this current political situation, you can't. So it's likely that sometime after this peace deal has been confirmed, that some of the Orthodox Jews will finally get permission to start sacrificing. Now this permission could happen toward the beginning after that deal, or toward the end, or in between. I don't know when it's going to start. We know when it's going to stop. Daniel 11:31 says it's going to stop. But for it to stop, it has to start first. And that hasn't happened yet. We need to see the gospel of the kingdom preached to the world as enough of a witness for the end to come. And I'm fairly certain that that will happen during the time when the King of the North is fulfilling various prophecies in Daniel 11, from verses 27 through 35, somewhere during that time frame. King of the North is not going to like the fact that we, the continuing Church of God, are identifying him. The King of the North is going to rise up claiming peace. You can read about that in verses 21 through 24 of Daniel 11. He's coming in peaceably. He's going to use intrigue. He's going to appeal to people in terms of peace. He's going to claim to be an ally of the United States and the United Kingdom. He's going to claim to be an ally of the Arabs. He's going to make a deal with the Arabs and the Turks and some other Muslims. He's going to make these deals. And what are we in the continuing church of God going to say? You're the one who's going to be the beast of Revelation 13. You're the one who's going to be making a deal with the Antichrist. You're the one maybe you've already started to do this. You're the one who's going to destroy the United States. You're the one that after you destroy the United States, United Kingdom, and others, you're going to destroy the Arab lands. Now, do you think this king is going to want us to go out and say that? Of course not. That's what I believe is going to trigger the persecution that we were talking about in Daniel 11 as well as in Matthew 24. There's other places as well. He's not going to want to hear that message to go out. The Bible also talks about a famine of the word. I believe he's going to do things that will end up getting us yanked off the internet to fulfill that prophecy. But Romans 9:28 is a prophecy about a short work that needs to be done. And right now we're preparing for that short work. So our websites, our literature will be ready in as many languages as we're able to. We'll go through whatever doors God opens up for us through languages and other media. Again, various outlets we're looking at right now. We do radio, we do YouTubes, we're on the internet, and we have other ways to reach others. Now, another thing that's going to happen is, let's go to Revelation chapter 17 that I want to talk about. And this is partially on my mind because of something that was in the news today. One of our, actually a Chinese member, sent me a link to an article about something today. And it ties into what I'm going to read in Revelation 17, verse 12 and 13. The 10 horns which you saw are 10 kings who have received no kingdom as yet, but they receive their authority for 1 hour as kings with the beast. They're of one mind, and they will give their power and authority to the beast. I'm not going to go over there, but in Daniel 11 we also find out that the king of the north, who's going to be this beast, gets in with just a few people. There's not a whole lot of people behind him. Well, in the news today, it was reported by Reuters, maybe he said it yesterday, but it was a news article I read was dated today, said that Vice Chancellor Sigmar Gabriel of Germany has said, as far as the European Union goes, we don't need 27 EU commissioners. We don't need a leader from each of the 27, 28 countries in the European Union, is what he's just said. It's too many. We need to reorganize so there's less of those kind of leaders. And this reorganization is something that's going to happen prior to the start of the Great Tribulation. Now, one of the reasons I want to emphasize this right here is that there are Church of God groups. As a matter of fact, 2 of the top 6, I think, in terms of size, have taught that the Great Tribulation really can't start until the European Union is whittled down to 10 or 11 nations. Well, that's not what this verse says at all. It says there's going to be reorganization in Europe. Kings who never had a kingdom before, perhaps regions or groups of nations together, are going to get together, give their power to the beast. And you can see, if you go further in verse 14, says they're going to make war with the Lamb. So this is going to be a persecuting power that's going to get together. So this is something is going to happen. It's going to get together prior to the start of the Great Tribulation. And groups who think that you have to have 10 or 11 currently existing nations, or nations is currently composed within the European Union together, and that's it, they will not possibly know when the Great Tribulation is going to start. So if you think you're in some Church of God group and they're going to tell you, let me flat out tell you that there are a couple of dozen prophetic errors that various groups have, that because of that they will not know when the Great Tribulation is going to begin, because they rely on tradition, mistranslations, and some other things that they should not be doing above the Word of God. So that's something that we're going to see. We will see some kind of reorganization in Europe. But as far as the final triggers, we're going to see the abomination of desolation spoken of by Daniel. And when that happens, it's going to be time to flee, as Jesus said. And we're going to see the famine of the word, I think, will happen around that time. The Amos talked about it, verses 8 and 11. In Zephaniah 2, verses 1 through 3, it says a decree is supposed to be issued. And that decree is going to be the time to when to go to be protected. So a decree is going to be issued. That's going to be when the Philadelphia Christians, the faithful Christians, are going to go to the place in the wilderness per Jesus' statements. Now you might say, maybe at that time I'll believe what you happen to say, and I'll come. Well, if you're not truly faithful, I don't think you will believe me at the time. Assuming it's me, it may not be me. And so don't deceive yourself that somehow at the last instant you're going to know when it's time to go and you're going to go. I've ran into many independent Church of God types who believe that's going to happen, or people who are in multiple Church of God groups who think, well, I'm going to pick and choose and I'll know because I'm so smart and I'll figure it all out. Don't count on that. And I would suggest, and I'm not going to do this in today's sermon, that you read Zephaniah 2, 1 through 3. You're supposed to gather together before the decree is issued, and it might be that God will protect you. You need to be supporting God's work now and not waiting until it's too late. Anyway, when that decree is issued, that's the time for people in Judea to flee according to Jesus' statements. And probably a few days prior to the start of the Great Tribulation, we will see the two witnesses rise up. And why do I say that? Because we find out that the two witnesses die about 3.5 days, I think, before Jesus comes back. And since they are preaching for 1260 days, and we were talking about a 1260-day tribulation, great day of the Lord period, says, okay, if they end early, they'll probably start early. And so that's most likely the scenario, at least that's a scriptural one as far as I can determine. Again, don't let people fool you or deceive you by their passion, trying to scare you into going, or their sophisticated and flawed mathematical calculations. Don't think that they're so smart they're not making a mistake. Many people have thought they were so smart and made all kinds of mistakes along this line. Well, anyway, bolstered by the Antichrist, the Great Tribulation is going to begin. Some scriptures related to that, Matthew 24, 21 through 22, Mark 13, 19 through 20, etc. Habakkuk 2, verses 7 through 8. Now, one problem in my last Church of God group, and there's at least one other claimed Church of God group that has this, is they believe the Great Tribulation begins with Daniel 11, verse 40, which is when the king of the north fights the king of the south, which I don't believe that's the case. Those who believe that Daniel 11:40 has to happen before Daniel 11:39 takes place are illogical and in scriptural error. The king of the north will destroy the power of the strongest fortresses in Daniel 11:39. That happens to be the United States. That's going to happen prior to the destruction of an Arab power that has not risen up yet. Anyway, the Great Tribulation is going to eliminate the United States and its Anglo-Saxon descended allies, the nations. As I said, the Muslim power will eventually get destroyed there. Years back, people pointed to blood moons, or they pointed to various other things, but the blood moons don't happen until after the sixth seal is opened. The Great Tribulation has to do with the fifth seal of Revelation. Then eventually you'll have the seventh seal open in the day of the Lord, the trumpet blasts and the plagues, etc. Then at the seventh trumpet, Jesus returns to establish the millennial kingdom. In summary, the Great Tribulation is not going to begin until 3.5 years after some kind of a deal is confirmed by the one who will be the king of the north, and at the time he'll have been the prince of the north. It's talked about in Daniel 9, verses 26 through 27. And then afterwards, we're going to hear we're in a time of peace and safety. People are going to think things are better because there probably will be less terrorism. There probably will be some things good, but not everything. We're still going to see some famines and pestilences, and they could also, including people in the Israelite descended nations. But this period of peace is going to throw some people off. But the reality is the end will come. I do believe the Great Tribulation will begin, but if you add 3.5 years to the second half of 2016, you'll find that that cannot happen before 2020. And presuming that there's no peace deal that is confirmed by the Prince of the North sometime in the fall of 2016, it even makes 2020 probably too premature. So should you pay attention to world events? Certainly. Should you watch the kind of things Jesus said that you should watch? Absolutely. Should you be misled or deceived by people who tell you the Great Tribulation can happen 2016, 2017, 2018, 2019? No, don't. Walk by faith, not by sight, 2 Corinthians 5:7. Believe what the Word of God says. Don't rely on your emotions or how somebody may try to persuade you. Believe what the Bible says. And if you do, you'll realize the Great Tribulation cannot begin prior to 2020 based on what the Bible says. And you can rely on that. This is Dr. Bob Thiel for the Continuing Church of God.